Hello everybody, welcome to the Cyber Tech and Risk Identity Security Virtual Summit. My name is Rodney Buike. I'm the National Lead for Cloud Identity and Endpoint at Microsoft Canada. And today I'm going to talk about some of the fundamentals of cloud identity and security. Now, while we've seen a fundamental transformation in security underway for this past year, the events of the last 14 months have all kind of put us on an accelerated path and brought some new tough challenges to the surface. The traditional perimeter-based network and security models that we had couldn't really adapt. And for many, the existing infrastructure was not ready for such a large shift to remote work. Many organizations now needed to support permanent hybrid work models where secure access outside the network is critical. As employees transition to these new work models, they're bringing more devices to add to the increase in endpoint diversity organizations we're already starting to see. And with all this, the digital estate continues to grow, making visibility and threat detection and response across multiple platforms and clouds challenging. Security teams now need more visibility, and we struggle with threat detection and response across this entire ecosystem of multiple clouds and platforms. This diversity, along with a lot of siloed solutions, makes rolling out new security controls difficult and inconsistent. And the bad actors know this, and they're exploiting these vulnerabilities today. And finally, for a lot of organizations, there's still a lot of work to be done in optimizing networks to prevent things like lateral movement and privileged escalation. And so this reality needs a new set of principles. The old assumptions will not keep us secure in this new world. We can't believe that everything behind the corporate firewall is safe because not everything is behind the corporate firewall. And so we can't keep operating under the old principles. We need new principles, and we need to look at the principle of zero trust. And there's three kind of key pillars to that idea of zero trust. The first one is to verify explicitly. I mean, we always have to authenticate and authorize based on all available data points, including and not limited to user identity, but the location, the device health, the service or workload being accessed, the data classification, and look at any anomalies within any of those particular areas to ensure that we are properly authenticating and authorizing with all of the knowledge and telemetry that we have available to us. Next is we need to, really focus on this idea of least privileged access. Not only from an administrative perspective, but from a user access perspective as well. We need to look at how we can enable just-in-time, just enough access to protect both data and productivity, but also minimize the ability for bad actors to do privileged account escalation and lateral movement. And finally, I think we've been talking about this for a while, and I think we have a good understanding of this. We really need to take an assume breach mindset, minimize that so-called blast radius for breaches, and employ a security strategy that really kind of helps prevent those lateral movements. I mean, attackers are swift, and they're able to move across domain quite easily. And we're going to talk about a couple of these particular points here around identities, and that's specifically around user account and privileged accounts being compromised. And so let's start with user accounts. And this is really kind of where the foundation of zero trust comes into play. A proper approach, a holistic approach to zero trust should really extend throughout the entire digital estate. It serves as the integrated security philosophy and end-to-end strategy for your organization. And there's a number of things you can do by implementing zero trust controls and technologies across these different elements. We're really going to focus on identity and verifying identity. And that starts with knowing who is requesting access. And then validating that access explicitly, and not just from the fact that they are connected via VPN or that they have processed, a second factor authentication. We really need to look at not only strong authentication, and validation, but also look at the threat intelligence that's available. So today, within the Microsoft cloud ecosystem, as an example, we're processing roughly 30 billion authentications per day. So that provides us with a lot of threat intelligence on anomalous activities, on broad-based attacks based on credential stuffing, password reuse, brute force, and also the information that we get from working with law enforcement around leaked and threatened credentials. And so when you add that into your identity and authentication workflow, and not only are you looking then at the username, the password, and second factor capabilities, you start looking at the user and the session risk based on that threat intelligence and the telemetry. It really allows you to build up a much deeper, much more secured real-time policy evaluation for that authentication process. And so in the Microsoft world, you know, we talk about Azure Active Directory as the foundation from an identity perspective to provide that. So with Azure Active Directory being the identity repository and the identity provider, the threat and risk information that we get from running one of the largest identity providers in the world within Azure Active Directory, alongside your conditional access policies, that's where we can really start to enable the zero trust capabilities within your organization. And so when we look at conditional access, you know, what we're really trying to do is ensuring that only the right people with the right resources on secure devices can access your data and applications, and that they can do so from anywhere. So Microsoft's conditional access policies really enable you to configure and fine-tune access policies with contextual factors, such as the user. Do they have a username and password? And have they been provided with the requirement for second factor authentication? What device are they connecting from? Is it a corporate-owned, trusted, managed device, or is it a personal device? What location are they coming in from? And not only from a geographic perspective, but also from a history-based perspective. Is it a location that they have logged into from before? And if not, is there any other sort of anomalous activity happening from that location? And that comes from the real-time risk information that we gather. And in combination, that allows us to really control what a specific user can access and how and when they have that access. So the conditional access policies really give you the power to enforce that core principle of zero trust. Never trust, always verify. And the zero trust security model relies on that security policy engine to make those access decisions that you can enforce throughout the digital estate. It enables your organization to fine-tune those access policies based upon those contextual factors, as I mentioned: user, device, location, app permissions, data sensitivity, session risk, and more. And this really gives you better control on how users are accessing those corporate resources. You can then use additional challenges such as multi-factor authentication, terms of use acceptance, or simply just access restrictions that then decide whether to allow, deny, or limit or block access to that particular resource. And so while conditional access protects the resources from suspicious requests, Azure Active Directory Identity Protection goes a step further by providing ongoing risk detection and remediating suspicious user accounts. So identity protection is really what keeps you informed about suspicious user and sign-in behavior in your environment 24/7. And the identity protection's automatic response capabilities proactively prevent compromised identities from being used. We've really kind of honed the identity protection engine through machine learning, and we collect about 71 terabytes of identity-based related security signals on a daily basis. And that's where we can get very fine-tuned and very precise with these response mechanisms. Now we're going to go through a quick demo of Zero Trust with Azure Active Directory and conditional access. And in this case here, I've got two browser sessions. One is an in-private session using the Edge browser. The other one is actually a Tor session. So we can see that this is a Tor circuit is going through Netherlands, Canada, Romania, and the user is putting in their credential in both of those boxes. So we're going to attempt the sign-in from the Tor browser first, and so we can see that conditional access in the telemetry has found that we've detected this to be suspicious. So in this case here, we're coming in from an anonymized proxied IP address. Azure Active Directory specifies that that is a medium risk event, and the policy says that anything medium risk and above, from an identity protection perspective, is going to be blocked. At the same time, from the Edge browser, I can go through and the conditional access policy can continue to evaluate the location, the device, the application that's being used. In this case, it's the Edge browser accessing the admin center within Office 365. And so there's a number of checks and balances that have come into play here. There was no multi-factor authentication required based on that specific policy. But multi-factor authentication only goes so far. There are cases where from either an insider threat or a user friction perspective that our first line of defense is still passwords. And passwords are notoriously bad. I mean, I think anybody who knows and has worked in IT security for more than 3 months would know that security around passwords is bad. We see them written on whiteboards. We see them shared between users within organizations. We see weak passwords, and so we're really starting to look at what we can do to increase that. So how do we leverage those zero trust principles along with leading edge technology, new open standards, to really kind of figure out how we can go behind and replace this sort of low security. It's not really convenient, it's not really inconvenient, it's just the way it is when we talk about passwords. Second factor does make things more secure, but it does add some friction. Users need to register a device. They need to be issued a soft token or a hard token. That device needs to be available to them whenever that they're authenticating. And so we need to start looking for a better way to secure access and secure identities. And this is really kind of where we're going with Windows Hello. Windows Hello, FIDO, the Authenticator app, they're all available and they're all options that we look at as we start to move towards a world without passwords. If identity is the foundation of zero trust and the weakest link in that particular scenario is passwords, how do we resolve that? Well, we move to a world without passwords. Windows Hello, Authenticator, and FIDO 2 keys all provide strong two-factor authentication by at the same time removing the need for a password. So today in preview, we've got a feature called temporary access password. And what that is it's a short-term password that a user can leverage to authenticate into the system, set up Windows Hello, set up the Authenticator app, set up the FIDO 2 security key to enable passwordless multi-factor authentication. And then once those solutions are configured for that end user, once they've done the facial recognition for the Windows Hello device, or they've configured the PIN or the fingerprint, they've set up the Authenticator app on their mobile device, they've registered their FIDO 2 security key. At that point, that temporary access password is expired, and from that point on, the user is in a truly passwordless type scenario where they can walk up to their Windows laptop, they can open the lid, smile at the camera, and be authenticated. It is true two-factor authentication across all of these scenarios. With Windows Hello, it's something you have, which is the device. Your biometric can only be registered to that device. And so, I can't walk up to somebody else's laptop and sign in with Windows Hello for as an example. I need the device and I need the biometric. Same thing with Authenticator. I need the sign-in code, I need the biometric, but I also need the device that Authenticator app is running on. And same with the FIDO2 key. We either need the key and the PIN code that's associated with that device or the biometric that's associated with that device. So across the board, we get multi-factor authentication with every authentication attempt, and we do so without actually having the weakest point in that scenario, the password, being anything that is required. So these options are all available today. If your applications are integrated with Azure Active Directory, you can actually start to leverage these capabilities today. And even if you want to try it out, this has been available for your Microsoft account, for your Outlook.com, your Hotmail, your Xbox account, whatever servers you're using today, to actually start to look at how this is going to work and go through the process of trialing this. So that really kind of takes care and starts to get us a good understanding of sort of how we can protect against user accounts that are compromised, and that zero trust principle around user account and user access controls. The other half of that then is, we look at sort of lateral movement, privilege escalation, and that's really where we start to look at the privileged accounts being compromised. Obviously, when we get a privileged account that's been compromised, that gives the attacker a lot more capabilities within the environment, whether it is a domain compromise or accessing more sensitive data and exfiltrating that data. That is where a lot of the real damage happens, so to speak. And so there's a number of threats around privileged administrative accounts. Whether it's an internal rogue admin or a threat actor that has taken over an admin account, there are a number of sort of activities that go with this. And so, most people have heard of, some of the really high profile breaches, the Targets, the Sonys of the world. But one thing you might not know is that most of these, and the two in particular that I mentioned, involved compromised accounts. And if we look at a lot of the recent studies, most studies will estimate that organizations are twice as likely to encounter a data breach due to a compromised account. That's because those most privileged accounts provide standing access with very little oversight when access is provided. Throughout my entire career, up until very recently, you had access to a global admin account, a enterprise admin, or a domain admin account, and that account was one that always had that level of access. And anybody could use that whenever they wanted to. A lot of times those accounts were shared. And so therefore those types of accounts were really the lucrative targets for an attack. And if I was looking at a threat actor or an internal rogue admin, having access to that privileged account was really kind of providing the keys to the kingdom. For example, in Office 365, once an Exchange admin role, as an example, is compromised, the attacker who has compromised that account can now start to siphon data to an external mailbox, to a server. They can encrypt that data and hold it for ransom. We all heard about the recent ransomware on the pipeline on the East Coast, and the amount of deep damage that can do. But the point is that with privileged accounts, they can only do that large-scale damage in a short period of time before they get detected. But really, by the time it's discovered, that damage is already done. And so, what really kind of helps to resolve this is some of the capabilities around privileged escalation, privileged identity management. And so, you might be wondering sort of what Microsoft does to approach this threat, to customer data within Microsoft 365, and what controls and transparency mechanisms we have in place for our cloud, for our internal IT operations, as well as our cloud IT operations. And I mean, one thing to note, Microsoft is a Microsoft 365 customer. We're not using a separate tenant or anything different that that any of our customers are using. So these ideas about least privileged access and governance are really kind of important to us because our data sits side by side with your data. And so we really need to look at how we not only enforce least privileged access, but provide governance around all of those capabilities. I mean, access is easy to grant. I can easily give an individual, a group, or a part of the organization access to a specific application. But you need the ability to trace who has access to which resource and be able to revoke that access when the user no longer needs it. And that could be, a move operation where the user just moves from one team to another. But more importantly, it's when those leave operations, when the individual leaves the organization. We need to be able to apply these controls both internally to our full-time employees, but also externally to our customers, our partners, and the vendors that we use. And so with Azure AD Identity Governance, built into Azure Active Directory, as well as our partnerships with third parties like SailPoint, we really have the ability to protect, monitor, and audit access to these critical assets. So we take a look at, right from the lifecycle management capabilities for onboarding, offboarding, those join, move, leave operations, and ensuring that when a user joins the organization, and you have Azure AD, connected to your HR platform, that we can automatically provision, deprovision access for users, which allows the new hires to really get started as soon as they have access, as soon as they start, and ensuring that access is revoked when that employee leaves the organization. So that's a very important part of the life cycle. I think we've all seen it where we've gone in to do an Active Directory audit and we've seen a number of users who no longer have been with the organization, yet they still have standing access to resources and applications. We also need to look then from that privilege escalation perspective how to manage those role-based access controls. So Azure AD helps you reduce that risk by using that sort of principle of least privileged access, not only for administrators, but for users as well. And when we can implement and automate these role-based access controls, we can ensure that people only have the administrative access they need. We no longer have standing level elevated privileges to Exchange, SharePoint, Active Directory, etc. Azure AD provides a variety of sort of task level roles to segregate duties across users. And this can be managed and monitored and audited through privileged identity management within Azure Active Directory. And finally, we want to be able to simplify and understand this life cycle with access reviews and certifications. We want to be able to manage identity and access lifecycle at scale. And to do that, we need to automate access requests. We need to build workflows for access assignments, for reviews and expiration using entitlement management. And this allows us then to review a user's access rights regularly with access reviews to make sure that only the right people have continued access and those who no longer need access have that privilege revoked. I mean, at its core, identity governance ensures that the right people have the right access to the right resources. It is that just-in-time, just enough access capability that extends to both users within the organization, as well as those who require administrative privileges. The join, move, leave process to manage user identities is a critical part of that. and required for greater security, but also to keep your current employees and your new hires productive. You can automate the identity lifecycle based on HR events and write back that relevant user data to those HR systems. And you can also then automate access to those applications using data, access to applications and data, doing the provisioning and deprovisioning of accounts into SaaS applications that support the SCIM protocol, but also then as we sort of build out identity management and privileged identity management capabilities, and how we can then extend that into those third parties as well. And so we've got a lot of great resources available today. I think the first one on the list there is really kind of going to give you that sort of deep understanding of this new zero trust security model. We really need to make sure we have a clear understanding and definition of what that is, so that we can build our internal security requirements and obligations around that. And it starts with kind of, leveraging sort of a seamless identity solution like Azure Active Directory, and then building on that with the capabilities for privileged identity management, identity governance, and the sort of the ability to do just-in-time, just-enough access to your resources based on the user role and the requirements for that particular user role. Again, whether it's a standard user or it's somebody who needs administrative privileges, we really need to look at how we address that, and Azure Active Directory can do that. And finally, the future is passwordless. I've talked about this before, and we're finally at a point where the combination of FIDO2 standard and the integration of FIDO2 into the Microsoft platform to be able to really truly deliver passwordless authentication to your users, whether that's Windows Hello on your Windows device, whether that's through the Authenticator app on your iOS or Android device, or the FIDO2 key, which kind of works across any device that supports that FIDO2 standard. We have the ability today to start making that move towards passwordless authentication. We've got a lot of great resources. My email address is up there. We've got a couple of URLs. I think the biggest one is aka.ms/security community, and that's where you can kind of go and connect with other security professionals and have information sharing, get your questions answered, but also learn from others and see how things are working for other organizations and other individuals. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.